Welcome back to Radio Rothbard. I'm Ryan McMaken, executive editor with the Mises Institute. With me, fortunately, is my co-host, Tho Bishop. And this week, we're going to talk about the recently concluded Libertarian National Convention. And this is a topic that I know virtually nothing about. So I'm bringing on Liam McCollum, who is active with the Mises Caucus within the Libertarian Party, and he's a member of both the National Libertarian Party and the Montana Libertarian Party. Now, if you're like me, you're not paying any attention to the convention, to the party. So I'm actually going to really, the way I'm going to go forward with this discussion is I'm going to leave it up to Tho and Liam to explain to me why I should care or what's going on with the party. So don't feel like, dear listener, that you have to know anything about this topic. And I'm going to try and really try and get out the information about the party that's relevant to normies like you and me, listener, who are not active in the party at all and didn't even know there was a national convention until after the fact. So we'll go through that here in a minute. But first, I want to talk about our free book offer at the Mises Institute right now. And we're giving away, we still got about 90,000 left of Rothbard's classic text, What Has Government Done to Our Money? Now, as I've mentioned in the past, this is a great short text. It's a short book, not a pamphlet. It is a full book, but it's a nice and short book about what is money, how do business cycles work, what is fiat money, paper money versus a real commodity money like gold, and what do you really need to know about all those topics in terms of the basics. And this text still, I've read it recently. It definitely holds up. It's aged well. So just go to Mises.org, Mises.org, the Mises Institute's website. Fill out the form, or you can go to Mises.org/money, and you can fill out the form there. And you can order one for yourself. You can order extra copies if you have some that you think you'd like to give away. And we still have a lot left for now, although they are certainly among the fastest among all of our products in terms of going out the door. So don't wait too long if you want to get yourself some copies of that. And also just be thinking in terms of our Fall Supporters Conference. That's happening in Hilton Head, South Carolina this year. That's coming up in October. That's just kind of the first mention of that I'll make. So give that some thought. If you're a Mises Institute supporter, you want to meet some of our speakers, think in terms of this fall, and if you'd like to join us for that. Now, to the topic. As I mentioned, I'm coming to this episode having done no research really on what happened lately with the Libertarian Party. I sometimes get questions about it from people who I know in real life, and they assume that there's some connection between the Mises Institute and the Libertarian Party, and there isn't one. Not really institutional, certainly not financial. And some people involved with the Institute are involved in the party, but some people like myself are not at all. However, it is something I like to hear about every now and then, just to know if something exciting is going on, or just as someone who's interested in American political systems, partisan politics, pressure groups, interest groups, all that sort of stuff. That's always been a major research interest of mine. So I want to hear a little bit about it, just kind of keep up to date. So Liam, Tho, I'm coming to you. I'm going to leave it up to you to explain to me what's going on, what the status is of the parties, what's kind of the philosophy behind the party. Why does the party exist? And how does it justify its existence given its very poor performance in terms of getting percentages of votes? And I know it's my understanding that this is not the sole reason for the party's existence is getting votes, that there's believed, as far as I can tell from talking to people, there's believed to be an educational mission and that sort of thing. But before we get into some of those details, why don't you just start off telling me where the convention was, who was selected, what does this mean for the party? Will people be hearing anything about who the nominee is? That sort of thing. Just give us some of the basics, just to get us up to the most recent news about the party, and then I think we can talk about some of the longer term details.
Before we get there, though, Ryan, can you name the nominee?
No, I cannot.
Okay, there we go. See, like this is the base level. This is the base level of knowledge that we have to work with.
Yes.
Go on, like.
So I guess I could begin with why I got involved in the party in the first place and what I think the approach of the Mises Caucus was. So the Mises Caucus got involved. I got involved with the Mises Caucus about 5 years ago, and this was after Nick Sarwark, who was the former chair of the party, had controlled for 3 terms and had basically rejected all forms of Ron Paul libertarianism. These types of people that were represented by Nick Sarwark would call Lou Rockwell a racist. And in turn, what we were supposed to take away from that was that Ron Paul, Tom Woods, everyone else that we look up to here at the Mises Institute is also a racist, and they should be pushed out, and they should not have the banner of libertarianism. They should not share that name. And so the Mises Caucus got involved with the idea of really bringing Austrian economics, Misesian ideas, Ron Paulian ideas, and Rothbardian ideas back into the party. It was David Nolan who founded the party, and he was not very concerned about electioneering. He was not concerned about running candidates, and he was under no illusion that libertarian candidates would be elected at high seats anytime soon. So the idea was, how could you use leverage to convince people of our ideas? How could we use an institution that bears our name to move the culture? And so David Nolan and Murray Rothbard got involved, and they backed the Ron Paul campaign in 1988. And after that campaign, and after Ron Paul joined the GOP, this group of people represented by the nominee that kind of represent the spirit that the nominee represents, Chase Oliver, these prag types is what we call them in the party. They call themselves pragmatists. So what they mean is they want to water down their message. They're not going to be Austrians because Austrians are too radical. Libertarians are too radical. Rothbardians are too radical. So these are people who are like, they want to sell the message by talking about, how can we lower the tax rate? They're not going to be talking about the major issues. They don't hate the state. They're regime libertarians, Cato Institute types. And I feel like what this convention represented was, and what the Mises Caucus was trying to do was trying to bring Ron Paul back. We actually had Ron Paul speak at our convention. It was in Washington, D.C., and that was not our decision. That was actually the old regime that scheduled it to be in Washington, D.C. We would never have done that. But Ron Paul got on stage, and he said, I am a life-sustaining member of the Libertarian Party, and I paid my dues in gold and silver. And really what I felt like the moment represented was bringing Ron Paul back home. David Nolan is dead. Murray Rothbard is dead. But Ron Paul's still here, and let's bring him to us. Let's bring him to the institution that bears the name of libertarianism. He is the person who's brought the most amount of people to libertarianism in our age. So why not have him close out the convention? And I think that is kind of the success of the Libertarian Party, the success of Angela McArdle and her reign. That's what it represents. But ultimately, I think the thing that is taking over the press right now, and the thing that is causing right-wing Twitter to freak out, is that Chase Oliver was elected the nominee. I'd be curious to hear Tho's take on all of this, because Tho and I have had a lot of conversations about this at Mises U, and whether the LP is the right strategy or not. I'm still of the opinion that it is extremely valuable, because the linguistic territory is very important. If we just have one less institution that bears the name libertarian that doesn't represent these regime libertarian types, I think it's a good thing. And I also think it is very good to have an institution that will speak the truth 100% of the time, that will call itself libertarian and isn't afraid of being Rothbardian. And the Mises Caucus really set out to bring like kind of the ethos of the Mises Institute into the party. And I think that's what they were trying to do with the Rechtenwald campaign, the Michael Rechtenwald campaign. Is he was a Mises Institute fellow. He was endorsed by a lot of Mises Institute people, and he had written for this institute. So I think really the goal is ultimately to bring the ideas that are found in the Mises Institute into the party, and like have it be a banner that boasts Mises Institute ideas proudly.
So before you go ahead, I just wanted to clarify something, just to make sure my thinking is right on this. So in my mind, the Mises Caucus, it was like other parties where, right, there are competing factions within any political party, right? So, for example, let's say within the Democratic Party, there's the economic populists who are more interested with like poverty and stuff. And then there's like the identity politics people who are like rich, white, trans people who have a very different idea about what the party should be doing. And they vie for control and leadership and direction of the party. I mean, is that a decent analogy?
Yeah, I'd say so. I think what happens a lot is when the Libertarian Party fails, and I would say, and I talked to Dave Smith about this, like this really does look like a failure of the Mises Caucus strategy in terms of at least the presidential candidate. Like we can't spin that any other way. Chase Oliver does not represent our ideas. But when people see that, it's almost like people try to cast the entire Libertarian Party as bad. It's the whole thing is a failure. But the reality is it's just like any other party. There are factions, and they played really dirty this weekend. It was uncovered that people were intentionally trying to be dilatory in order to get Mises Caucus people to leave. So we ended up electing the presidential candidate and the vice presidential candidate really late on Sunday. We went into Monday morning. So it was like 2 a.m. when we actually concluded. And by this point, I think I heard this. I'm not sure if this is the exact number, but I heard that 200 people had left, and I knew multiple Mises Caucus people who had left from Montana. So I'm sure that was a theme across the board. I mean, a lot of Mises Caucus people have jobs, and they aren't. They don't do libertarian activism for their entire career. So I'd imagine that played a large factor. But yeah, there was a lot of dirty politics that were played. When we gavelled in on Friday, instantly people were making point of orders that were just ridiculous. We didn't get through the credentialing report until Saturday morning. So I think it was the intentional strategy of these people to wait until the last minute to get them elected. And I think that's confirmed by the fact that, and the big positive event that happened is that Angela McArdle was reelected to the chair position, and the Mises Caucus took 80% of the board, the LNC, the Libertarian National Committee. So we're going to have this presidential candidate for 5 months. He might be an utter disaster. We already knew that because of the RFK ticket, the Libertarian was going to get like really low numbers. So it's almost kind of a good thing, right? We can point to Chase at the end of this campaign and say, look how disastrous that was. I would say another thing that characterizes the split between the Mises Caucus and these Prag types is that the Mises Caucus is very much dealing in political realities and has been very forthcoming about the idea that they do not think that a libertarian can win, whereas the Chase types are campaigning to win. And as a result, they're not adapting their strategy to reality. The Mises Caucus strategy has been to acknowledge up front that we are not going to win office. And then because of that, we realize that the culture is more important. We acknowledge that politics is downstream from culture. And if we can somehow use the big platforms, somehow use the presidential ticket or gubernatorial tickets to be fully Rothbardian, fully Ron Paulian, we can invite people like Trump or Vivek to our convention, which we did, and we can get them on the same exact platforms as us, and we can be principled 100% of the time while they put up guardrails. And I actually think the most positive thing to come out of this convention was that we got Donald Trump, Vivek Ramaswamy, and RFK to our convention, and they were pandering to us. There are a lot of people who who are saying, well, we shouldn't have done it because obviously they're liars. But the reality is that these people, like Donald Trump the man, I wasn't as excited that Donald Trump the man showed up to the convention. What I was excited about is that Donald Trump represents this ethos, this dissident ethos right now that is very important and that we can reach. The right wing in America is accepting anti-war ideas. Donald Trump got on stage and he said, maybe I am a libertarian. I was thrown in jail, or they're trying to throw me in jail. And that's a very good thing, because a few years ago, the idea of like a conservative bragging about going to jail, like these are kind of Blue Lives Matter types who love cops. And the idea that like Donald Trump is bragging about the system coming after him is huge. And the fact that he's willing to associate with the libertarian moniker is also huge. He asked for us to nominate him as our delegate, meaning that he wanted to have the libertarian name on the ballot next to his. He also made a lot of promises to, for instance, free Ross. I have this poster. I don't know if people can see it, but we had these posters and held them up through the crowd, and we were cheering free Ross, and he ultimately promised or pledged to commute the sentence of free Ross. He also promised to put a libertarian on a pardoning board when we were chanting free Assange. And the Fed chants, he promised to ban the CBDC, central bank digital currency. He also promised to keep cryptocurrency in the United States. And I really think that this shows you the success or the potential of the Mises Caucus strategy, because we acknowledge realities, because we know that we cannot win in November. You see Angela McArdle, the chair of the Libertarian Party, positioning herself to actually have an influence on one of the candidates who is the front runner, right? And if we can actually position ourselves to do that, I mean, it's the most important and the most powerful thing that the Libertarian Party will have ever done. If we are able to actually see Ross Ulbricht released, I mean, the Libertarian Party helped facilitate that. And for the people who say, well, Donald Trump, as soon as he is elected, the incentives change. What I care about are ideas. I care that Donald Trump got on the stage in front of libertarians and in front of Trump supporters and said he wanted to identify with libertarians. He wanted to identify with people who wanted to free Ross. And even if he doesn't ultimately end up doing the things that he promised, he's moved the culture and he's moved Trump supporters in our direction. And I think that that's the big white pill of this weekend, and the fact that the board is fully Mises, and Angela McArdle took over the party, and she has indicated, I highly recommend you go to her Twitter account. She has indicated that she is still willing to talk with the Trump campaign and try to get more compromises.
Well, I'm going to start off with saying, with actually praising what the Mises Caucus mission for doing something very important. And because if we fast forward back, not only did you have the inner libertarian movement battles between Sarek and Dave Smith and Tom Woods and the like, but you also had the disaster of the Rand Paul 2016 campaign, where you had during the Ron Paul years, right between 2008 and 2014ish, you had an organized libertarian political movement, right? It was behind the lead of Ron Paul. And the problem is that Rand was not successful for a variety of reasons at keeping that momentum going. You had the Trump effect that completely re-altered politics in a variety of ways that, have to be acknowledged. And what the Mises Caucus did do was reorganize the libertarian movement. Now, it did so under a third party, and I personally have had concerns about that strategy. And really, Dave Smith, I think, deserves a lot of credit, because essentially the way that I view things is that effectively the leader of the libertarian political movement in terms of outreach and getting normal people involved and spreading the ideas that are, the people that aren't reading Mises.org, that aren't interested, that are not yet interested in going deeply within the ideas. Dave Smith has demonstrated himself. He has earned really that leadership role with the success that he's had going on a variety of platforms, the podcast that he has built for himself, and the fact that Dave Smith kind of became the leader of the Mises Caucus, the face of that movement. It was people following his lead that have built this entity to what it is. And the only reason why you have Donald Trump going to the Libertarian Convention rather than, in the past, right, there have been large libertarian events. And I remember 2016, one of the first places Donald Trump went to after he after he went down the escalator, right, it was Freedom Fest, doing something similar. But it's because Dave Smith was there that Donald Trump was there, in my opinion, because like that made it the center of the libertarian movement. Now what's fascinating, and I think this is what's far more relevant than the party itself, is, as Liam mentioned, it's this notion that Trump is engaging in what can be explicitly viewed as transactional politics of old, right? I mean, this is the way that political factions used to operate, right? The idea is not you're going to get your pure ideological candidate up there, but you're going to be able to get some concessions in exchange for a voting bloc. I'd be interested to see how this process plays out. Now, and what essentially you have is that because of the organization of the Mises Caucus, libertarians now have the political clout of Kim Kardashian, which is something that's a massive upgrade, right? But that's why, like, the Free Ross thing, I think, does have legs, because we've seen it in the past. Trump has always been willing, particularly using the power of the pardon, right? He is perfectly fine doing a transactional deal on these things in exchange for utilizing that pen of the pardon. Now everything else, he talks about putting libertarians in his cabinet. Thing is that you actually had libertarians in certain degrees within various parts of the administration. You had a former you had Mark Calabria, who was part of the banking wing of Cato, who was on one of the housing cabinet, the housing institutions over there. You could easily see, for example, a Corey DeAngelis taking over as the Secretary of Education. I think that would be, kind of right in line with, having Betsy DeVos last time around and the like. So whether or not it'd be like a capital L libertarian, kind of a libertarian activist, someone from the party itself in the cabinet positions, based on some of the libertarians he was mentioning, Rick Grinnell, which I'm, he's a good libertarian. I don't know if Mises Caucus folks would necessarily agree with that. But again, getting just an extraction from that. And I think the other dynamic that is most fascinating is the extent to which the crypto lobby, which is fundamentally, I think almost necessary within both the origination of Bitcoin, but also just we see it reflected with kind of the ideology of a lot of the people within that industry are like that. That it creates a very interesting, almost inherently libertarian lobbying base now. Where I think it was 2018 where Trump was texting, don't trust Bitcoin, right? It's not the dollar. Don't trust it, right? Now he's going a full shift, and a reason why it's not that I think Trump has become orange pilled, but he's read Safety and Amos or anything like that, right? But it's because you now have that industry has developed a lot of maturity on the political side of things, and sometimes that's going to mean political donations, which we know some of the folks that might receive those funds are things might have views that we don't like. But I think it's very interesting that you now have a special interest group, particularly given just the horrific record of the Biden administration in particular, going after the crypto industry. We've talked about it a few times on this show. Caitlin Long, who was at our Human Action Conference, which I was very, very excited to see her there. She does a great job of documenting this on her Twitter. She's gone against the Fed with her Custodia Bank project and various areas there. We've seen this whole Operation Choke Point 2.0, where they're trying to debank the crypto industry. And so here, I think that this is, if we're looking for just kind of positives beyond sort of purely idealistic grounds, what we have are two distinct things that we can identify here. One is that the Libertarian Party has that you were able to get a dynamic where concessions were being willing to make, particularly. I think Trump was brilliant in really personalizing it with Ross Ulbricht. Would love to get more of this. Roger Ver, who's someone in the crypto industry that is in Spain right now, who the U.S. government's going for. Assange, obviously Snowden. Some of these go-to figures, but really personalizing, putting a face on what this transaction could look like, I think is very compelling. the art of the deal and all that sort of stuff. So there's the ability to utilize the power of the pardon, I think, in a very direct way. But also it's reflecting this much larger political muscle that a libertarian-friendly special interest group within the crypto industry is showing its weight. And so these are things that, in spite of what one thinks about the Libertarian Party itself, and I do think, having Chase Oliver, it's interesting because a lot of the concerns about, the critics of Angela McCardell, who I think did a fantastic job with this convention. I really respected the arrows that she took taking these stands. The critics, her critics, like, oh, well, you're going to help Trump. Oh, this is platforming Trump. Well, nominating someone like Chase Oliver, who really goes to the distinction. I mean, he's said all sorts of bad things about Lew Rockwell, about Hans Hoppe, about a variety of the folks in our orbit. Someone who's never wanted to cooperate with the Mises Caucus at all. He uses all the standard slurs. Someone who was social distancing at his Thanksgiving, right? Someone who is pro puberty blockers for kids and things like that, right? Someone who accepts basically all the narratives of the regime, but kind of mixes it with, oh, we'll just cut taxes and kind of low tax liberalism, essentially, right? You have the same sort of issues that have long been a point of criticism from Rothbardians to kind of the way that the libertarian movement has directed. Having that as the standard bearer, I think in this election cycle is going to do more to help candidates like RFK, like Donald Trump, like whatever, and our individual views on those people don't really matter there. That will do more, I think, to undermine any chance the Libertarian Party has of attracting votes in this election cycle broadly. I mean, I think essentially, if you're not a diehard partisan of the Libertarian Party, right, they only, I think those are the only people that are going to be attracted to what the ticket ended up to be. We haven't even gone into the vice presidential candidate and all that sort of stuff there. So the LP candidate on this ticket is only going to attract the hardcore partisans. You have a very interesting transactional game. You have the special interest organization with the crypto industry. And again, I think this creates some very interesting things that libertarians should consider. It has given the libertarian voting bloc, however, no matter what party you're in, no matter where you're wanting, there's a new level of interest that really has not been in existence in national politics in particular since Ron Paul's run. And so I think that is to the credit of the Mises Caucus, even if a third-party strategy going forward might not be the best way to continue that momentum in the future.
And I would just say, like, your point about partisanship is very important. Another thing that really characterizes the divide, I think, between the Mises Caucus and Chase Oliver types is this partisanship. They almost look at the Libertarian Party as this third thing, and it's good for the sake of it being a third thing. It doesn't need to represent pure libertarianism or whatever. It doesn't need to have a strategic vision. Whereas I think the Mises Caucus is more willing to support people like Thomas Massie. It was Dave Smith who interviewed Blake Masters and said that libertarians should not run against Blake Masters. So there is kind of an openness among the Mises Caucus members to entertain having this interplay between the GOP and the LP. And I think it is represented most clearly by the Vivek Ramaswamy, Dave Smith, and Clint Russell debate that we saw at the convention, where we could kind of see the value of having people who are friendly in both parties, where Vivek is playing a different game. He's trying to get elected, right? Clint Russell is not trying to get elected. They're friendly. Vivek clearly in this conversation is putting up guardrails. There were times where Dave Smith and Clint were alluding to Israel, and Vivek completely alluded, like he was not going to go there. But Clint Russell and Dave Smith are principled 100% of the time. So I think the value of it is that in that moment, you see Vivek Ramaswamy supporters watching Vivek actually lose a debate when this was the guy who was going on the stage and he destroyed Nikki Haley's political chances. And I guess it does look like Donald Trump is considering putting her somewhere in the office now, but he at least ruined her chances for the presidential ticket. And in that moment, we had Clint Russell and Dave Smith winning an argument against Vivek. The famous line, I think, that Clint Russell said that really took the roof off of the building was, I am tired of seeing the GOP campaign like Ron Paul and governing like John McCain. And Vivek had nothing to say. He just said, "Oh yeah, it was a good one." So I think there is value in having this, like trying to win the linguistic battle, taking over this party that bears the name Libertarian, and just committing it to promoting ideas as opposed to running candidates, and acknowledging upfront we're not going to win. So how can we influence others? And if we could get to a point where the Overton window between the GOP and the LP was from Vivek Ramaswamy to Dave Smith, I mean, that would be a success. And we saw the potential of that this weekend.
Well, it sounds like, just looking at the party structure in the U.S. and how it has been leveraged in the past, it sounds like the Mises Caucus people are the people who have a better grasp of reality and how third parties can actually have some effect on the political system. And yes, if the point is to get some concessions from candidates from the major parties, that is the role that third parties have generally served. You look at the 19th century, right? Lots of third parties in that period. Perhaps the most successful being the Free Soil Party. And their nominee, for example, in I believe it was the 1856 presidential election, their nominees were Martin Van Buren, that was their presidential nominee, and then Charles Francis Adams. I mean, these are major figures in American politics at the time. Van Buren, of course, had been president under the Democratic ticket about 20 years earlier. And so what did they do with that? Well, they got concessions from the other parties. And their major issue was they didn't want slavery expanding into the Western territories of the United States. This wasn't so much an anti-slavery thing as it was a populist thing, where they wanted that land to go to small-time farmers, not to large slave-owning planters. They were catering to sort of your lower middle-class white person. And they did fairly well as a party, and they definitely changed the positions of the two major parties in that period. Now, what tends to happen is these third parties, they then get absorbed into another party, or they break out because there's an important issue that they need to make, need to apply some extra pressure to one of the parties with, and so on. And so you could see how maybe it's a faction, that it can behave like a faction within a party, but outside the party. And that has worked. That strategy has worked. It has been used. Often, I think a lot of Americans, they have this impression of, well, it's a two-party system, so there's nothing you could do with it. Either you just agree with everything one of the two parties says, or there's no role to play. Well, the truth is, of course, you can make a difference in primaries. You can make a difference wringing out concessions from parties, from the two major parties acting as a third party. And that's something, the role that the Green Party has served for years. It's always been there to push the Democratic Party a little bit further to the left. And I don't agree with those positions generally, but you can see how if you stray too far from what one of these spoiler parties is willing to tolerate, that provides an outlet for votes for people who are dissatisfied with one of the two major parties. And I think that has a disciplining effect on the two major parties. And so I can see how it serves a real purpose. And we can definitely find examples of it from how that can be effectively used in the 19th century. When you had what also in those cases a more permeable situation between the two parties. You might have major candidates moving between the two parties more often. And okay, so I'm a Democrat this cycle, but now I'm a Free Soil person this cycle, or an American Party person this cycle, and then they move back after the party has served its purpose. So it does serve a real role, I think, in applying pressure to the two major parties if done properly. But it sounds like the non-Mises Caucus people have no interest or knowledge of that strategy.
Yeah. Right. So after Trump spoke, there was an opportunity for a press conference, and Chase Oliver and Mike Termott, the presidential ticket, they got up there, and Chase Oliver basically condemned the move. said that we shouldn't have invited Trump to the convention. He's not a libertarian. He's a Republican. So it's this partisanship that we talked about before. But he went on to also say that no real libertarian would serve in the cabinet of Donald Trump. And I was like, I don't know, if you got Scott Horton to be Secretary of State, that would be the best thing that Donald Trump ever did in his entire life. So it just goes to show you that they're not based in reality. And the Mises Caucus strategy, it's you can actually find it online. There's a kind of vision document for it called Decentralized Revolution. You can find it on the website, where they basically say, like, this is a very long-term game that we're playing because we have no electoral potential right now. So looking at reality, what can we do? We can impact the culture through the things that we did this weekend. We can also, lean into issue coalitions. So the Libertarian Party and the Mises Caucus have got behind issues like Defend the Guard that I helped lobby for last year in Montana. In more left-leaning states or districts, they have tried to back psilocybin legalization. So it's really recognizing political realities of where you're at and implementing a decentralized revolution strategy. So it's like if you're in a left-leaning district, what are the issues that you could move the Democrats on? If you're in a Republican district, how can you move Republicans toward libertarianism? And I'd say that was the long-term vision for running a presidential candidate in the first place. Running Dave Smith wouldn't have been to get Dave Smith elected in November, and I'd say that he'd say the same exact thing. It was instead to tell people to sign up for their local Mises Caucus chapters, tell people to sign up for the Libertarian Party in the state, and get behind these issue coalitions at the local level, because we are kind of the belief that the federal government is lost anyway. Even if we were to get these concessions from Donald Trump and he were somehow to avoid all these wars and fight back against the deep state, like even if he got elected, we don't think much like we saw his first term. We saw how Pompeo controlled the CIA and really weaponized it against Donald Trump. So we're just not putting faith in that. So instead, we're telling people act locally. We saw during the pandemic how basically we had this tacit secession, this implied secession that was going on, where people were moving from New York to Texas, and we're just telling people to look locally and try to implement libertarianism in their life, in their community, as opposed to putting faith in these presidential candidates. So I guess that's kind of the silver lining, is it's like we can point to Chase and say, well, that was never going to win anyway. And when he gets less than 2%, we can say, yeah, I mean, that's just not the strategy. And I am very happy that Angela McArdle has shown a willingness to adopt different strategies, and it does seem like she has more planned. If you go to my Twitter, she quote tweeted one of my tweets and basically said there will be some more announcements coming soon.
Well, and if we're looking for examples of how third parties can influence things, there's actually a very interesting 20th century example. And unfortunately, I'm expecting ominous organ music to pop up behind me when I mention the name. But one interesting thing outside of a CIA career that Bill Buckley did an interesting job with was with the Conservative Party in New York, which was explicitly its entire goal was to pull away Republicans that from candidates that he did not like, into to leverage that endorsement for candidates he did like. And by doing that, they could shift, by basically threatening to shoot a hole in the boat. That was a way of applying pressure to get some compromises with the candidates that were there. And I guess that's my concern with it. But what you need within that, right? Like that requires party discipline, so that members of the party understand their role. That the goal is not what is in the best interest of the party in a narrow sense, but what's the best interest in gaining broader victories, however you want to define it, in the long run. And so that's what I'm interested in going forward is, after this weekend, I know there's a lot of demoralization out there because Chase Oliver is the nominee. I think that you have a lot of frustration built up. I know there was a lot of disappointment when Dave Smith was not the candidate this time around. Is the Mises Caucus going to be able to have the discipline to have Libertarian Party members, explicitly party members that fill these positions, have the discipline to stand down when there is a candidate in another party that they want to endorse, whether it be Republican or Democrat, depending on the area, or not. And we actually kind of saw this when Dave Smith endorsed Blake Masters in the Arizona run, is that you had, and the Libertarian Party race was a great guy, Mark Victor. He's spoken at Mises events a lot in the past. He's a great libertarian lawyer. There's a lot about Mark Victor that is definitely praiseworthy. But he wasn't going to win. And you even had a lot of Arizona Mises Caucus people upset with Dave for signing on to a candidate that he thought was a major step in the right direction for a variety of reasons. Blake Masters, went to Mises events in the past and all that sort of stuff. He was quoting Rothbard on Ron Paul's show and things like that. And so that's the difficulty, is having the discipline within a party infrastructure to put the priority of the mission over the label itself, over the party itself. And how that goes forward, I think, is ultimately going to dictate the lasting legacy that Mises Caucus has. And so how that continues to organize after this past convention will be very interesting, because I think we all, there is, again, for reasons that Liam mentioned, and for reasons that we talk a lot about on this show on Radio Rothbard, inflation in particular, right? The number one political issue in the country, injecting our ideas out there, the necessity of cutting spending, the necessity for sound money, again, crypto, the role that crypto plays. Again, something that is Vivek Ramaswamy, he talked about a libertarian nationalist alliance, which fans of Murray Rothbard could see echoes of the paleo strategy from the 90s there, when people like Murray Rothbard behind Pat Buchanan and his run in '92. The question then is, what are the desired libertarian ends of that? And one free idea, anyone listening, to me, the one thing that is achievable at the federal level is simply eliminating taxes on alternative currencies, on gold, on silver, on cryptocurrency. Obviously, as we mentioned, there's a large political lobbying base within the crypto industry now that would love that, right? The value of their assets would go up immediately if you're not taxed on it whenever you put those into dollars. Anyone that holds gold, right, suddenly becomes richer because you're not having to worry about paying taxes if you need to liquidate those holdings for any reason, right? And so it's a way where this is one of the problems that Republicans always have, is that Republican victories don't equate to material well-being, increase of the wealth of Republican voters for the most part, right? There's you can fiddle with tax rates here and there. Sometimes there'll be regulatory changes that might help small businesses, but most of what the DC Republican agenda is typically benefits big business. And there's economic gains. We're not trying to necessarily demonize big business as itself bad, but a lot of the people that run those big businesses, right, they're giving money to Democrats, which is a whole other calculation there. And so if you just had a few liberty-minded Republicans, or just people trying to shamelessly do this transactional political side, if you had enough Republicans within the House and the Senate to force the elimination of capital gains taxes on these alternative assets, whenever you have the GOP pass a generic tax bill, right? This could have been done in, for example, 2018, where you had a must-pass tax bill, right? Trump wanted it. You had people like Marco Rubio got as a concession a doubling of the child income tax credit. But people like Rand Paul, they just signed off. It's like, oh, tax cut's good, just sign off on it, not leveraging what they had when they needed every single Republican vote there. So if you were able just to create a small coalition at the federal level that understands the pressure points that actually matter, and the money issue is one of the most important things out there, then that's the ability to extract major wins with a small number of votes. You do not need a libertarian takeover of the GOP to force something like that. And so I think that's one of the next steps going forward, is having the broad libertarian political coalition, regardless of the party that you're in, identify what are the steps that are achievable now. Elevating. Okay, well, what are people like Corey DeAngelis that are recognized as experts in their field that can push fairly radical ideas within whatever sector that they might be able to influence? What are the achievable goals? How do we go about getting those achievable goals, rather than just having this broad message of educationalism, which education is important, right? This is why the Mises Institute is here. I think if you look at libertarian organizations, the two that are better off now than they were in 2016, it's the Mises Institute and the Ron Paul Institute, right? There's a big role there for the education side of things with the institutions dedicated to it. But in terms of a political movement, that's where you try to find, okay, what are the concrete policy wins? What are the concrete political wins? Where are the places that we can leverage our power going forward? And again, we saw an example of that with the possibility of pardons. But going forward, I think will again further demonstrate how this broad ideological movement can be transitioned into something that has political potency. Because again, desperately, looking at the landscape now, the only one that the only people that have any real solutions for dealing with these major fundamental problems are people that read Mises and Rothbard, right? If you love your country, you read Ludwig von Mises. We need more influence of people that read our books, that seek us for intellectual nourishment, because within this period of this interesting reshuffling of conservative ideas, what we don't want is an upswing of the failed neo-Hamiltonian policies, these socially conservative interventionists, people like the American Compass and Warren Cass, and people that I like to attack on a regular basis. Because with this complete reshuffling of conservative ink, if you will, there's a danger that a void there can be filled with even worse ideas than we've had before. As hard as that might be believed, this is an opportunity for us to push back and to engage and to assert because I think that there's, in spite of the larger political success, America's cultural foundation, that there is a strong folk libertarian bent, if you will, that is still inherent within a much larger percentage of the population than you might suggest from political outcomes. And so again, how can that be mobilized? How can that be organized to a place that has potency? And it looks like people like Trump, again, no matter what you think about the man, trying to explicitly lobby to that group. Again, this is how special interest politics, is how political coalitions can have real success within the convoluted Leviathan, completely awful state of the modern political system.
And I think this weekend really demonstrated why, having a party that isn't outright hostile to build bridges with the GOP is extremely valuable. Because Trump came to our convention and he said, there was that joke, the conservative Twitter was trying to spin the whole or you can keep getting 3%. That was the main takeaway from the convention. But the reality is the subtext of that is that he does need the 3%. So we could have used that as a negotiating tool. We could have used it as leverage. And it is ironic, I think it was mentioned earlier in the show, the Mises Caucus strategy, putting someone like Dave Smith or someone like Clint Russell or someone like Rechtenwald on the ticket is actually the thing that is most dangerous to Trump, because it is appealing to Trump's ethos, the MAGA base that is very, like you said, this folk libertarianism that's going on. So then we could have used that as a negotiating tool, whereas now Chase Oliver is someone that none of that base would represent. He's going to be pulling all of the support from Biden. It's going to be college leftists who are protesting the Gazan war. But I think what was so interesting about the event, I totally agree with you about the capital gains tax thing on money. It's when we were chanting "and the Fed," and he responded by saying, well, we should ban the central bank digital currency, right? It really seems like there is a window there to sneak something like that in there, because it sounds kind of boring to people who aren't in tune with Misesian thought, right? So it just seems like something that's so technical, but it's the most radical thing you could do. It's almost even more radical than introducing an end the Fed bill, because the end the Fed bill is kind of educational. But even Ron Paul, when he was on Tim Pool's show last, he said he wouldn't outright ban the Federal Reserve because it would be disastrous. Instead, he would try to nullify the Federal Reserve by having competitive money. So if you got rid of capital gains tax on money and actually allowed people to start trading in whatever currency they want, it would effectively nullify the Fed. And I think yeah, if someone is listening to this, I think that is what we should be trying to sell the Trump campaign, because I can't imagine that Trump's going to go out there and endorse Mike Lee's and the Fed bill. I don't see that happening, but I'd be very happy if he did. And the one other thing that I'll say is about the Trump event itself. There was a lot of criticism over like the Libertarian Party boos. There were a lot of people who were booing Trump. And I think the problem with it is that boos don't really communicate much. So there was like a time when Trump was like bragging about how he had the best economy because he lowered interest rates and stuff like that. And we're just booing. And you could imagine like some Trump supporters are like, well, what, like you're not celebrating the best economy? And it's like, well, no, we're booing him because he lowered interest rates and he's got to get rid of this thing because you can't artificially set interest rates. But I think the educational tool is that like immediately after that event, you saw the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, all of these publications were saying the same thing. There was a Politico article where it said Donald Trump supporters were chanting, "We want Trump," and then it was drowned out by "and the Fed" chants. And there are multiple people in the crowd that were turning to me and saying, what does "and the Fed" mean? And I can imagine in a similar way that when UFC fighters get up there and say, if you love your country, you should read Mises, there are a lot of people who are going to read that article and look up "and the Fed." And they might find themselves with Ron Paul's book, or they might find themselves with Rothbard's "What Has Government Done to Our Money?" So I think that is really the value of what we saw this weekend. It's very significant. And I'm hesitant to be just pessimistic from the start. I want to see where this goes because, like I said, Chase Oliver will have 5 months and the Mises Caucus board will have 2 years. And it seems like they have a willingness to actually build bridges and talk to people. So, yeah, I'm actually very excited.
All right. Well, we better wrap up with that for this episode of Radio Rothbard. My thanks to Tho Bishop, my co-host, and of course to Liam McCollum for coming on here. And yeah, I think this was pretty educational for people who I think on the outside, I think the loudest people that they hear are generally the people who are very dogmatic in terms of you vote Libertarian or you don't vote at all, and they just don't understand the concept of the coalition political party in the United States. And so it does sound like there is a faction in there that gets how that is supposed to work. And yeah, I think if that can be done properly, I think you can make some real progress there. So, go
really
ahead.
Quick, I just want to say, I would keep your eyes on states like Colorado. Tho had talked about this strategy of like the Blake Masters strategy of trying to identify Liberty Republicans and either endorsing them or not running a candidate against them. And the Libertarian Party of Colorado has kind of demonstrated a willingness to reach out to the GOP. They actually signed an agreement with the state GOP in which they would not run candidates so long as the Republicans put up candidates that represented certain ideas. And there does seem to be an appetite to do that in more states. I know here in Montana, we can't outright endorse, and there's some difficulty because of the open primaries where we have sometimes Democrats or Republicans trying to run as Libertarians just to drop out at the end, and they're not going to message like Libertarians at all. So we have some issues with that. So what we have tried to do is we have started a scorecard committee, and we are going to reach out to people in the GOP and people in the Democrat Party, and we are going to interview the primary candidates. And we've already done a few, and all of the candidates have endorsed Defend the Guard that we've interviewed. All of them have endorsed the Defend the Guard Act. We had 3 people who said that they wanted to end the Fed. And basically we have this long questionnaire where we're basically going to come out with a ranking of all the primary candidates. And they see the value in it, and they really want a good ranking from us. So I think it's just trying to see how we can go out there and influence the culture more. And I hope that people who see the value in that stay in the party and aren't completely pessimistic because of the presidential ticket, because the Mises Caucus strategy was never about the presidential ticket as a whole. It was always a means to an end. So I'd encourage people to at least be patient and see what happens.
All right. Well, thanks again, Liam. Thank you, Tho. We'll be back next week with another episode of Radio Rothbard. Remember, you can always get more information like this at the Mises Institute's website. That's mises.org. But until next week, we will see you next time. Thanks.